Hello, everyone, and welcome again to the latest edition of Startup Grind's Founder Series, where we educate our community on highly relevant early stage topics through interviews with founders of our top startups. Today's subject is the art of the pivot, and we will dig into how FanFood has navigated the past year as a startup dependent on the existence of large in-person sporting events. You can see where this is going. Through this story, we will aim to educate other founders in the Startup Grind community about what a pivot looks like in practice, including how and when to consider a pivot and how to manage the process end to end, both internally and externally. I'm Alex Gordon-Furse, VP of Sales and Startups here at Startup Grind, which is the world's largest startup community, educating, inspiring, and connecting pre-seed, seed, and Series A startups across 120 countries. My guest today is Carson Goodale, who is the co-founder and chief strategy officer at FanFood, who are based in Chicago, Illinois, although you've just moved, you were just telling me, down to Cedar Rapids. So thank you very much for joining us today, Carson.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. This will be fun. Happy to come on the show.
Nice. And I'd love to just start off by understanding a little bit about your background pre-FanFood, and we can kind of set the context.
Yeah, sure. I am a first-time founder. Graduated from the University of Iowa in 2016 with a finance degree. And prior to that, I served some time in the Iowa Army National Guard and ran in parallel when I started the business in the Army Reserves as a officer.
Amazing. That's a diverse background. I don't think we've had someone from the National Guard on before.
Yeah.
Awesome. And so obviously, with the name of the episode being the art of the pivot, there's a kind of a pre and post question here. So I'd love to just say, what could we get the pre and post COVID descriptions of FanFood, just to kind of give?
Yeah. I would say, so pre-COVID, the mission of the business was, so FanFood, just for people that are listening, is an online and mobile ordering platform, as well as an in-seat delivery solution for live events. And like you alluded to, that kind of relies on large gatherings, for which, we had our series of, challenges during the last year. But pre-COVID, the mission of the business was to deliver the ultimate fan experience, because as a sports fan, nothing's more frustrating than waiting in long lines for concession food. So we really aimed to solve that problem and really make that process as easy and frictionless to do. And that was our mission. And then when the pandemic hit, I would say it kind of reaffirmed our conviction in the company's mission, but I think with greater purpose. There's a little more purpose to it, right? Because the fan experience, or the way that it was defined, kind of changed, right? What the ultimate fan experience means now is like, how do we help fans or guests in live events feel more safe and comfortable during these times in a more contactless and safe way. So, I think that, it just kind of reaffirmed what we're doing.
Nice. And just as well, before we kind of go into things a bit more, I can probably understand a little bit about it, given that you said you're a sports fan yourself, but I'd love to understand, like, where did the original idea come from as a first-time founder?
Yeah. So not like a crazy aha like kind of moment. I was actually at a bar with some of my buddies complaining about a crappy, a crowded experience, and wanted to order a drink off my phone and have a server bring it to me rather than me having to go navigate through a crowded bar and get lines. We pivoted. At the time, Grubhub, they IPO'd in 2012, and this whole concept of on-demand convenience was a pretty new and exciting topic. The idea of ordering a taxi from an app, or booking, leasing out your apartment space and getting some extra money. Some of those ideas are pretty new, and I felt like trying to start up a bar ordering kind of app was going to be pretty challenging. And I felt like the biggest pain point as a fan. It was solving the same pain point, but it was just a greater need. In my opinion, I think the greatest problem in sports, from the fan experience perspective, was waiting in line. So myself and my co-founders, we actually elected to pivot to those large gatherings, and that's where we felt the greatest opportunity was, with the least amount of competition.
Nice. And so obviously, I think you were founded in 2016, right? So between 2016, just to kind of, again, set things up for focusing on last year and what you actually did and what you went through, what can you just talk us through, like between 2016 and 2019, how did your company evolve from like, once you set up that first initial MVP through kind of building and testing it and fundraising?
Yeah. I think we kind of took the traditional entrepreneurship journey. We started by kind of bootstrapping the business with, savings, to initiating a family and friends round after we graduated, and we were serious about going full time. I was under the belief that, I didn't want to look back in 5 or 10 years. I remember this is what my mentor told me back then. He says, you want to look back in 5 or 10 years and ask yourself, what if? And that kind of stuck with me. And I felt like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to take it full time. And, so I think, we did that along with getting a family and friends round. Once we kind of secured that funding, I went off, moved up to Chicago after living in dad's basement for 8 months, and to give it a real shot, to kind of grow it grassroots, build up the relationships in a city that, is, known for kind of sports and great sports culture in Chicago. And that's kind of so then from there, it's, we raised money from angel investors. We did an equity crowdfunding platform that was pretty successful a couple of years ago. And, we started off by trying to figure out what markets work. At the beginning, our first couple of customers, we were staffing these accounts and kind of taking that burden on, and just trying to, figure out a model that we could achieve product market fit with, continuing to iterate on the platform. And I think achieving like pretty decent growth, adding a handful of customers, and then it got, doubled down. And then I think in 2019, we added over 50, and in 2020, we actually added over 200. So it's been growing pretty steadily every year over year. So
amazing. And when, the kind of magical question that everyone's always talking about in that early stage space is, do you know, how do you know when you've got product market fit? What was your process for, once, you were initially kind of testing out the idea with different prospects or partners, and then you started scaling things up. At what point did you think this is really what we've got? It works for these type of people.
Yeah. So when I was actually on active duty, stationed in Fort Jackson, South Carolina, when we launched our beta product, and it was actually at my co-founder's high school. And at the time, the platform could only offer a express kind of pickup functionality to the app. And I think on the first night, there were, 500 people in attendance, and we got 20 orders through express pickup. And we thought it was just an incredible, the people I remember there was this one little boy who had placed 3 orders in a single night, and he was 8 years old. And we were so excited about that. We're like, oh, this is going to be great. I think it's tough to say at what point do you feel like you have product market fit, because you have so much passion, and you're well, that's it, right? That it's going to be a wild success. We made a couple bucks, on every order, and we're okay, now we just got to scale the number of events, and we just got to figure that out. And I think it's just a constantly iterative process of okay, you solve one problem, there's going to be another one, and then you just kept going at it. And so, I think there was, now in this world that we're in, I think one of the biggest challenges that we tried overcoming pre-COVID, and we'll probably talk about this a little bit later, was getting fans in attendance to download and use an app to place an order, especially in environments where like Wi-Fi signal and connectivity was spotty from time to time. And like, you know, now I think there's definitely a silver lining from the pandemic, because it kind of, that problem in itself was kind of solved, because it's like people just use it to like, be more contactless, right? So a nice to have kind of product for fans is now like, a need or a must. So I think like we're fortunate in that perspective. But yeah, it's there's no like, no, I thought like that I had enough conviction after our first like pilot trial that like we were onto something.
Yeah, that's amazing. And that 8-year-old, I guess, he's now 12. Is he?
Yeah,
Hopefully he's still using it.
I am same. Same. And hopefully I have more venues. So
And okay, so and just before we get into it as well, are you technical, or is it your co-founder who was technical in the first few
so
days?
both of us were not technical
Right.
back then. It was, we got some awesome support. So my dad actually had built and exited a couple software companies. He's
Yeah.
a technical guy, and so he was really really helpful in building the architecture of the platform in the early days. As well as there was a professor at the University of Iowa that had an overseas team that we asked for help from him as well. So like we kind of tried to use the resources, and I think that's another thing. We did the best with what we could find at the time to make something, to bring it to life, and then we did. So
Awesome. And so after that, how many people, firstly, were you at the beginning of 2020? How many people were working for FanFood?
In the 30s, mid 30s.
Okay. And so what functions had you hired out between 2016 and end of 2019? What areas were you hiring?
So we closed our first institutional, I think, our seed round of funding. It it Yeah, it was in the end of December 2018. So January 2019. So that year is when we received our first round of funding, real round of funding, and from there, we grew that to be pretty heavy on the sales and marketing fronts at first. And then started to add a couple folks to technology, but it was definitely heavy on that front, less on on account management, customer support, operations, things like that. We kind of figure that that can be more of a reactive process as we start to ramp up customer count.
Yeah, yeah. So kind of scale first, like get more venues on first, and then be, as you say, be reactive and kind of lean in terms of hiring, customer support, and so on. It's like when we need it, we'll hire it straight away. Yeah,
exactly. But when the pandemic hit, it was kind of an interesting, like we did, like it was all pretty much internal. Like the customer success like became people from different areas of FanFood.
mm-hmm.
And like we just kind of carved out new departments in a pretty quick way. Like that was kind of part of the pivot, because we were there was pieces of the business where we had to cut a lot of our operating expenses. At the same time, some of the pivots into these new markets that we went into were doing well. So it kind of forced us to like, okay, now we had to make some pretty quick decisions in the summertime to really support this growing customer base that actually is doing pretty well. So yeah.
And so at the beginning of 2020, how was your strategy looking in comparison to kind of where it went? What were you kind of planning to sort of focus on?
Yeah, it was like, you close your first round of funding. I think, in quarter four, kind of going into 2020, we were super excited. We were like, okay, we 500, we want to be in, we have our focus for these kind of small and medium sized venues of focused on large gatherings. And we kind of had the way that we structured our team was both, outbound. We had an outbound and an inbound sales team that were kind of regionally focused, and supported by marketing efforts that we were going to be. We had a good framework of what we thought was going to work well. BDRs, a team of BDRs responsible for booking qualifying appointments for the decision makers, and then our sales team responsible for closing them. All and everybody kind of most people located in Chicago too. So also in the early stages of kind of building out that team culture and camaraderie, and everyone was excited, and we started seeing some success, going into the new year, and we were super excited. But
yeah, so at what point did you start to notice red flags, like, and how when you did, how openly were you discussing them as a management team?
Well, at first, I think I was kind of one of the naysayers, to be honest with you. I was like, this probably isn't going to be like that impactful. And like, yes, everybody, I still would love for you guys to come to the office and, like, but then, I think there was probably 1 or 2 weeks into, we were like, okay, we definitely need to go to a full like remote workforce. And I would say like our transition to that was pretty seamless. Like most of the FanFood team was, millennials and like younger. So like used to technology. We communicated regularly on, like Slack, and, we used we're kind of used to that kind of work, that work life anyway. So I think, we communicated often, but in terms of like when we knew that we were going to need to pivot, it was pretty like much immediately. That we knew that events were going to be, not looking good for us and our business. So like, it was like right away, I knew, like, and I think the challenging thing for me was like already, like, as a growing, and I think a lot of startups probably listening to this can attest to this, like, there's never enough cash or time in the day. It feels like as a startup, especially one that does receive venture funding, because you are kind of, once you take it, now you're on kind of like a timeline, right? And so just by that knowing, and like we were, like I kind of alluded to, like we were looking to get sales and marketing ramped up, before the kind of revenue recognition. So like we knew that there was going to be some challenges. So it was like, but we had a great team and we were starting to see some early success. So it's like, what do you do? And so we were forced to like execute on creativity and go into like these new markets, and kind of at the same time, actually, like it was purpose driven, because we knew that with the platform that we have created could actually make a real impact for markets that we felt were probably overlooked and underserved.
And so is this sort of like March time last year that
March
started kicking off? And so like, what was the decision-making process for choosing your direction, or choosing how you would pivot what you already had and your current product and service offering to other markets, as you're talking about?
Yeah, well, I think like one of there's a couple of ideas that we had. Like we knew, and like we knew that some of the markets that we wanted to be in that were kind of similar to venues, but still kind of untraditional in nature. And we had a couple of those customers prior to the pandemic hitting. So, when the pandemic hit, like we kind of looked at, okay, what are our current customer base? Which ones are still going to be operating? Like, what's the path of least resistance to still like get customers on board and get cash, get cash flow through the business as quick as possible. And so we actually introduced a business model. I think this was probably in Q2. That was a kind of a commission-free, no-cost model to businesses that wanted to get on the platform, where the way that we would make money is on the back end. So like we really focused on implementing like a frictionless sales process as quick as possible to get customers through the door. And then with our current customers, so some of the markets that we went into, we had a couple of drive-ins prior, and that market did really well for us. And they say I Googled this, it was like in 1940s, there was thousands of drive-ins across the country. And like today, there's, hundreds. But we kind of doubled down, marketing efforts, sales efforts, everything we did on those drive-ins, and we pivoted. And this was, and there were some decisions that we did that were just like, we're like, F it, we just got to kind of do it. So a lot of our like SDRs and BDRs that were still like relatively new, that were responsible for meeting, qualifying these appointments, were like, all right, you're the inbound team, close bottom of the funnel deals. Outbound, like your responsibility is to pick up the phones and start dialing. And we just kind of had to like suck it up and kind of get shit done. And we had to like come together as a team in order to do it. And like some of these markets, like we started targeting, and I would say the third thing, so there's new markets. So we went into like food trucks and restaurants, drive-ins, malls, and we got a couple of hotels. So kind of like started to like diversify where we felt like there would still be, an opportunity to generate cash flow. And then we looked at, okay, how can we leverage our current platform or a product, like how to cater to these markets? So like one of the products we were working on, this one, and this was like probably the biggest, the one that we're most excited about. We were finalizing a product for premium suites. That's kind of on our core functionality, a way to.
You mean
premium,
like in stadiums, like a premium suite? Yeah, okay.
For that executive assistant that's booking a seat, they can essentially pre-order, right, a suite package ahead of time. And then for in-suite customers, they have the ability to like scan a QR code and, place kind of a la carte orders and get them delivered to their suite. So it was an extension of our core platform. And when the pandemic hit, we took that, and it wasn't 100% complete. And we took a couple people on our team to focus on this concept that we came up with called Building Eats. And we leveraged our existing technology into this new market. And what in that program does, we hyper-focused in Chicago to start, but we were targeting residential buildings and partnering up with local restaurants and food trucks to do a pre-order delivery service. So the restaurants would do these deliveries, but they were, today, I would say we've added over 100 residential buildings in the Chicagoland area, and that's been the one that we're super excited about. We leveraged all of our the same business model. We took pieces of our existing technology, we kind of reframed it to kind of fit that. And then it was almost just like starting over, like the lean startup. Like we just took a couple, a small group of our team, and we just kind of restarted from the beginning, it felt like. And it was kind of a fun exercise to kind of go through that process again, just take the lessons that you learned from trying to grow the FanFood business and apply them to like almost another business within the business. So. And
was your attitude, I mean, because everyone deals with these kind of things differently, right? Some people say, the obstacle is the way, like I'm going to see this as an opportunity rather than like, something that's detrimental to our business. I'm just going to adapt. And some people kind of get bogged down in the problems and the fact that their plan is going to have to change. Were you guys from day one thinking this could be an opportunity for us to pivot and make our business, move faster on other things?
To be honest, what was motivating me was the fear of like having to like let go of the team that I just felt like we spent so much time and energy and like, like building, and I think like I was scared to like, because I felt like it wasn't deserving, like they didn't deserve it, right? And there's only so much things that like you can control, and like this is just one of those things that are outside of your control. So for me, I took it like personally responsible to like try to do something about it. I would say the end of the year, I got way too burnt out. And I think like I said, there's a silver lining, you know, in the sense that, you know, like one of our biggest challenges in the space was, like I said, that marketing, that in venue kind of marketing that is kind of, and so like I think it's, you know, it was awesome that we were able to leverage creativity and, you know, pivot into new markets, and now we're kind of presented with, okay, with the resources and kind of budgeting that we have for you know, moving forward, like where's the focus, like in these new markets that are like showing some promise, or in like your original core, and like, so it's a really interesting exercise. And you know, I'm definitely a glass half full kind of guy, so I do try to look at it optimistically. But yeah, near the you know, we had to, unfortunately, there was two really hard times of the pandemic. The first was transitioning from, you know, quarter 1 into kind of quarter 2. So a few months into the pandemic, when we knew like, okay, we just can't sustain these operating expenses and the people on payroll. So we did have to make a cut then, as well as near the end of the year. So today we're at like 14 people. So we you know, obviously took a big hit, but you know, had to do it,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
And I'll definitely come to the team piece in a minute, and how you were communicating to the team throughout, because obviously that's you know, critical as well. But just to understand the product, so you went from the sort of mobile ordering at large sporting venues, and then you mentioned drive-thrus, hotels, restaurants, or like, you know, food production facilities. What is that kind of a summary of the different products that you went into? And then when you say new markets, do you mean those, or do you mean new geographical areas as well?
So I would say like the new markets were the drive-ins, the, you know, the like theater, like a theater we kind of looked at as an opportunity, but with all theaters being, so we knew drive-ins would be a good market, because, you know, you're still in a confined your car, you know, there's still those events going
Socially
on.
distance, yeah.
Like, yeah, it's a social distance space, but it's still that entertainment piece. So that's kind of like why we decided to target that. And I would say that the biggest change to the product offering, so all of it was leveraging the same technology that we had built for events. The one that big, the big change one was the introduction of the Building Eats as an extension to the kind of core product offering that we do have. So giving residential folks the ability to, okay, it's a Tuesday, you know, night, and I want to order from, you know, Torchy's Tacos is delivering from 6 to 8. So now you have the ability to like pre-order that meal for your family in advance and get it, you know, delivered. And I think something that makes that program special, aside from, you know, the way that we leveraged our technology creatively, is like the business model, because like from day one, it's always been, you know, commission free for these businesses. And the fact that, you know, like the kind of traditional players, I mean, you know, like restaurants and stuff, like their margins aren't, you know, fantastic by any means. So this was a way to, you know, to really help businesses keep the lights on and keep running during this tough time. So I think that's why, you know, as a part of our mission, like there's more kind of purpose to like what we're doing now.
So they then paid you a flat fee rather than commission on the number of orders. They paid you a flat fee to be part of FanFood, or to be presented to your customers. And then would they deliver the food to the commercial, the real estate areas? Yeah.
Yeah. And they're all in proximity, but yeah, And so like where we're at now is just kind of expanding that out. So hopefully, you know, we can get to a point where like, you know, they're offering every day is a new unique, you know, menu from a local restaurant or, you know, food truck. And it's a new unique, you know, menu, food item that you can do that pre-ordered service. And yeah, we're excited to see where it goes.
Great. And I will come back to just like how, what your focus will be now that you've got all these new product lines and new markets. But interested just, you know, to go back to that communication thing that we were talking about earlier. So what, you know, when it came to, you know, the first few weeks of the pivot, you know, internal and external comms, like how did you manage the internal comms to start with? What were you kind of telling employees? How often were you kind of communicating that to them?
I would say like pretty regularly. Like it was more of like and it was interesting too. I think we were like just finalizing like for the outbound team that, we had the BDRs and the AEs, draft 90-day plans with their regions and how are they going to attack it. And we were kind of going through that process. And during the presentations that finally after the 90, we're like, okay, how is this going to completely change? And, I think like we really, and if you ask the team, it might have been like me kind of freaking out at the top, being like kind of pushing down, like, okay, we have to do this because, we hired folks that were excited to sell into sports venues, right? And that's a person. So to say, okay, now you have to go focus at restaurants, like that's not what they signed up to do. So like, how do we, no one was like, it's because it's a different persona, right? Hospitality is different than the sports. And, it, we really tried to communicate or like look for ways to like empower the team to like, come together and solve this like as a team. And like we tried to communicate as often and regularly as possible and be transparent with the team about going through. And I think like the team was like really good and understanding about like, yeah, we know this is going to be really tough, but
Yeah.
we're all in this together kind of thing.
Yeah, I think, certainly from what I noticed, people just pulled together, right? Like everyone just kind of knew that they had to. It was in everyone's individual and collective interest to just work closer and
Totally.
just deal with things on the short term. So that's really interesting. And then outside of the sales team, were there other people who had to have their roles kind of like repurposed? I mean, how did I guess with the dev team, you've got people with a variety of different skills and they're just building a new type of product. But was there any major change there as well?
Yeah, like I would say, so that's an interesting one because, candidly like we would have ran out of cash had it not been for, so there's one of the anchor, investor in FanFood kind of leaned in with great support. I mean, yeah, we had to really cut our operating expenses and we, had to make some tough decisions on the staff, but like we would have completely ran out of cash if they didn't like help us, keep us going. So for that, I will always be like grateful that, for that. And in addition, they supported us with adding a couple of development resources to really allow us to execute on the creativity of these new markets. So for us, we actually, I would say that like our roadmap kind of we were really able to develop and build, new features and functionality quicker than we anticipated, which was fantastic. I would say outside of that though, there was a lot of, they say like in startups you wear like a ton of hats and everything. And like for me, at the time in March, I was planning on doing a series kicking off the series. Like I was like, okay, we got this awesome team built, established, they're on board, we're ready to rock and roll. Now I'm going to go out and raise some growth capital and then the pandemic hit and I'm like, okay, that's not going to be a productive use of my time. So I basically chalked that one up to no way in hell we're getting a lick of funding. So I kind of, did an about face and looked inward and kind of focused on, okay, we need to figure out how everything I did, like, so I would support, try to be, I moved our sales leader to the head of customer success. And then my kind of co-founder and I kind of stepped in to kind of be the sales leader and manager of the sales group. And everything I did was so intentional. I was like, okay, it has to have a process behind it. So back then it was, from leveraging our CRM, like how do we make it so like our sales reps don't have to spend too much time in the CRM so that they're spending, and how do we make the quoting process as seamless as possible? And like, is our business model like where it needs to be. And then now, we were constantly communicating from customers, like, what's the feedback? What's the product? I think one of the biggest things that it was very product driven company to start, but the way that we prioritized pre-pandemic was, I think customers will want this. During the pandemic, it was, what do the customers actually want? And we prioritized the roadmap. That's another important thing. Like, we had a roadmap that wasn't actually executed. It was basically what the customers wanted. So we became very kind of customer obsessed to like what features and functionality they want in order to provide the best experience for them, because we realized like those were so important during that time to keep our cash flow going through the door. So yeah, that was a really, really interesting, quick kind of exercise.
That's awesome. And so, yeah, I mean, it sounds like you were basically just trying to reduce friction in as many places as possible, right? Like, every tiny bit of friction that you can remove adds up and cumulatively has a huge difference on your company's ability to execute.
Totally. And then, from a marketing perspective, it's like, well, we knew, like, we had kind of figured out what works and what doesn't work. And now that we didn't have a lick of marketing budget, what other things can we do? So we became, like, early on, we pivoted to, like, webinars that would aim to, like, try to be helpful, or, for our venue operators that, were definitely SOL, but, like, going through this planning process. And, something that, like, we've been doing for the last 5-6 years is, like, we've been harping on this kind of transition to a more cashless, environment. Just the benefits of that far outweigh. And we knew that's kind of where the industry was headed into when the pandemic happened. We knew, like, okay, our 3 to 5 years assumptions are going to be realized, a lot sooner than that. And so we became very, very active on social media. And I think that's another thing that, like, our brand did or has been doing very well, led by our marketing team, putting out, doubling down on content, doubling down on webinars, doubling down on just, kind of creating that, engagement with the followers and, that community that we have been able to establish up until this point. And I think, like, that has really helped us. That was super, super helpful. Like, even, like, the first time with the new customers that we did case studies on those, video case studies, and put those on. And that led to attributed to a lot of the sales growth during the pandemic, was because of those marketing efforts.
And when you were talking to these new customer types for the new products or the new markets that you're going into, did you ever struggle with the sell because they said, well, you guys are usually selling a product for this particular customer type and we're brand new, so, like, how do I know there's going to be value here for me? How did you deal with that?
Yeah, that was a pretty challenging one. Like I said, like, fortunately, like, for drive-ins, we had a couple of drive-ins that were already, like, very well, like, respected drive-ins in the space that were kind of, doing things or trying to leverage technology in a more efficient way and stuff. And so, like, we wanted to champion our decision makers as best we can. Like, we didn't want to say, well, take it from us, right? Like, because exactly to your point, like, take it from the voice of the actual customer. And so, like, when we were able to get like, that's why we were so focused on getting feedback early on. And then layering that in with, like, the data, like the actual results, because you can't, like, they kind of speak from themselves too. Like, so, like, the increase in revenue, like, and when you compare it to their traditional basket sizes and the frequency of orders and just the overall enhanced guest experience that we were able to, like, quantify for the customers, really helped us, maintain that leg up, because it's something that you can't really argue.
Yeah, and one question I also had when you were talking about that is, in the States, obviously you've got different states were dealing with COVID in different ways. So how did you deal with the constant uncertainty of responding to that when Illinois is doing one thing, California is doing another, and so on?
Yeah, like our like we created like different Slack kind of channels, and I remember we were like on top of it. So as soon as news came out one state, like there, we would be communicating that. And like I remember for Ohio, for example, like they were one of the first states for like high school events to reopen, and that kind of led to what we noticed was an uptick in customer growth, like inbound opportunities from those states that were reopening. So like, in a way, that because we kind of went from, we had to make a lot of reductions, obviously, to the sales force. So in kind of a lot of ways, it kind of, I don't want to say helpful, but allowed us to like kind of be focused with our sales efforts, right? We knew, okay, California is going to be shut down. There's not going to be a chance, but Ohio is opening. Okay, like where should we spend our time? Ohio. Like, okay, that kind of gave us direction as to like where our team should be spending our marketing and sales efforts. So,
and I guess you're talking about and if you can't divulge too much information about it, obviously don't feel like you have to. But you're talking about cutting, in different areas of the company. Was it mainly in sales, or because I guess customer support or at least customer success and dev, they're kind of critical operations maybe, but was it mainly sales?
Yeah.
And like, what was your process for that? Just because, again, like there may be people listening to this who are gonna. I mean, there are definitely going to be people who are going to have to do this at some point in the near future. Every startup has to, or lots of startups have to go through it. Is there anything that you can describe or explain that might help other people kind of do it in their companies?
Well, it's definitely not. It's definitely the worst part about a job, especially in the early days when your team is the reason, for your success. So for me, like it's it was definitely like an emotional process, because you kind of develop personal ties to the people at your team. And I think by being, like genuine, like about it, and authentic is probably the most important. And like one of the best pieces of advice that I got was, and like with the pandemic too, it made it pretty, I don't want to say like easy, but like our team was very understanding. And like I think that's like the important piece. We just kind of communicate as early on as often, but like when you do it, you have to be like swift. And like if you're making the decision, you have to make it. You have to be swift when you do it, and like just refrain. I noticed, like, because some people are just going to get like there's some people that are just going to get pissed off, right? And they're going to be like, why are you doing this? Why me over someone? And the best piece of advice that I've gotten was like refrain from the why. Like you don't go into it. Don't go into like the rabbit hole, I guess. You dig yourself. Like you just stay very high level and just stay like firm and swift and be like good about it. So I don't know.
Yeah, that's definitely useful. I mean, one theme that's constantly coming up is just communication, right? I mean, what you're saying is I mean, I definitely agree with that. I'm always a promoter of sort of I'd rather people over communicated than under communicated. I think there's more bad that can come from lack of communication than too much. So I think that's something I'm noticing in the things that you're saying. It's just all about kind of making sure that people understand what's going on basically throughout.
I think, like for me personally, I took a lot of personal responsibility about, and I'll tell you what I didn't communicate. If I would have done it over, what I would have communicated more like sooner was like the cash flow position, and like being more open about our finances. I think, and that is what kind of personally, as like an entrepreneur, co-founder, there were some things I wanted to keep separated from folks. And then I I shouldered a lot of burden that as I've gone through this process, I definitely would have shared more of that with the team to share some of that. And I think that would have led to, the team, like, it's amazing. It's an amazing team. Right. But that would have led to more ownership and stuff. And I think that wouldn't have, I think, burnt me out near the end of the year. I had to take some time off from work to really focus on my own mental health. Cause that's something that, we kind of don't talk about enough in the startup world. So,
yeah, I'm not surprised. I mean, going through all of that, running a company, having to, yeah, as you say, let people go that you hired because you knew they were a good fit for the company, being close to running out of cash. It's, yeah, that incredibly stressful year. So I'm not surprised.
yeah.
And so coming into this year, obviously, there's still uncertainty, but you've mentioned you've got these new markets and you're trying to understand, like, what do you want to focus on? So having done that pivot last year, you've now got a lot of a new opportunity. I mean, like, presumably you said you had some good growth, even though you'd been hit quite so hard. So how are you making decisions on what you want to focus on this year and even beyond?
Yeah, well, I think it's building, starting to operationalize and build like a scalable plan with the Building Eats program, because that has a clear path to profitability, which we're really excited about. And it's staying, we plan to stay a lot more lean, until, like, events do open up, which, we're hoping come summer, that a lot of our outdoor venues are planning for 100% capacity, which, like, kind of fingers crossed. But for the events that are open, we have our premium suite product. So we figure, well, if there's going to be, let's say, 20% capacity, like 100, a lot of people are going to be in the premium suites, because that's, like, kind of how we have kind of our sales strategy for that. And yeah, and some of the new markets that we've gone into have been, because sports are a very seasonality, type play anyway. So, like, one of the markets that we've gone into, by leveraging our progressive web app, is resorts. Like, and so that's been, especially during the winter, like, kind of continuing to, again, think creatively. And another one is, like, airports, like, so, like, trying to think of, like, ways or untraditional venues where, like, people are still going to be ordering food and beverage that, are going to need it. And so that's how we're thinking about it. We have a few irons in the fire, and I would say from a fundraising perspective. So obviously, if, pending that closes, that kind of allows us to, carve out our branches. But I think for our team, like, right now, is we're kind of just staying pretty focused on, like, building out our kind of core product. That's something that we're kind of going through right now, and the book of business that we have been able to develop, right? So you have, like, your 0 to 1 million in ARR businesses, and then you're, like, 1 to 10, and then, and so the stage that we're in kind of right now to achieve kind of growth does rely a lot on, like, channel partners and distribution. And so, how does that start to play into the mix of kind of where that next stage of growth that we want to go to, and doing it in a way that is, like, financially, like, prudent. Like, we're still, like, we're very, very, like, lean with our spending right now, because we have to be. So, that's kind of just the nature of the beast. So.
And you talked a bit about fundraising there. Have you already started raising? Obviously, you mentioned that you were looking to raise a Series A back in March. Everything changed. How soon are you looking to raise? And, like, how different are your conversations with investors now than they would have been at the beginning of last year?
Yeah, like, it's fundamental, like, it's so much different. Like, it, I think now where there's some, the persona of the investor also kind of changed. And, I think too, so something that I learned from the pandemic was, like the importance of building, not just relying on top line revenue, but like wanting to actually build a profitable and like sustainable business. And I think like those are very like important values that a company like should have. And I think like, you know, we're fortunate because of the pandemic and these new markets that we've gone into and the customers that we did acquire, to a point where like after this funding that we do plan on securing, we might not need, and hopefully not need, to go out and continue to, you know, fundraise. We might not need another round of funding again, which is like in my mind like the hope. So that's kind of like the goal, I guess, for us. So definitely to be profitable on the back half of the year is what we're planning for.
Amazing. And in terms of the transition back to, or you know, there's a lot of talk at the moment about the like how permanent will the shift to remote work be. You mentioned, I think before we spoke, that you know the office was you know pretty much everyone was in Chicago. You've now moved to Cedar Rapids. Everyone is working remotely. What is your personal approach going to be, or FanFood's approach to potentially a hybrid model, or fully back in the office, or fully remote?
I personally like just miss seeing the people's faces in like my team, and like I like having that routine of like going to the office, and like I do think though the remote is probably going to be here to stay. It just affords so much more flexibility and into your business, but and I definitely believe that we'll probably remain pretty heavily on the remote, you know, the remote side. But I do hope that there is a piece of like our business where we do get to maintain like a, you know, an HQ and a ground, so that like we have that consistent, you know, face-to-face interaction, because I do think that's important. Especially when you are trying to establish like your culture and like you know, and everything like that. Like I think that is important.
For sure. Well, I think we're coming up to the hour mark now, so I think we'll bring it to an end in a wee minute. But just before we do, for those in the US, are you wholly focused on the US at the moment, and will you expand beyond soon?
Yeah, no, we are actually we have some international accounts, and I do think that, you know, some countries actually have, you know, like no solution like
Yep.
this yet in place. And so we've kind of identified those, and have began, you know, trying to, you know, make our inroads. So we've kind of already modified our platform to accept foreign currencies. And, you know, we started to kind of connect with certain partners over there, you know, in those certain countries who can help kind of bring, you know, get us there. And yeah, it's definitely part of our planning process and consideration. So.
Nice. And for people who want to use the FanFood app, do they just go on App Store or Google Play, just look for FanFood and download it?
Yep. Or you can go to order.fanfoodapp.com and check out the venues. So.
Awesome. Well, Carson, what a journey. Crazy story. And yeah, I'm not surprised you had to take some time off towards the end of last year. Sounds like you went through a lot. Mentally, probably physically as well, and your team too. But super glad to see you come out the other side, and with a lot of opportunity ahead as well. So it's been really great to speak to you, and thanks so much for sharing all your stories as well. And I'm sure there's a lot of value there for everyone watching or listening.
Yeah, I hope so. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks so much, Carson.